Most people throw away the things they outgrow. Old jeans, concert tickets, high school jackets. But for some reason, you still have that old metal shirt. Why? Maybe you still have it. Folded in the back of a drawer or hanging in the corner of a closet, an old band shirt, faded, a little worn at the collar. Maybe it's Metallica, maybe it's Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath or Pantera, and maybe you haven't worn it in years, but you haven't thrown it away either. And maybe, just maybe, when a certain song comes on, you still turn the volume up, not because you're trying to relive something, but because something in your chest still recognizes it. So here's the question this video is really about. Why did this music stay with you when so many other parts of youth did? Somewhere along the way, people started acting like heavy metal was something you were supposed to outgrow. Get the job, raise the family, put away the band shirts, listen to adult music. Act your age. But a surprising number of Gen X men never did, and the reason has almost nothing to do with music. To understand why, you have to go back to where it started for you. If you were born somewhere between the mid-60s and 1980, you came of age during one of the most electrifying periods in music history. Heavy metal wasn't just popular, it was alive, it was loud, it was physical, it was everywhere, and it felt like it was speaking directly to you in a language nothing else could. You didn't stream it, you hunted it. You saved up money to buy albums. You stood in record stores turning cassette cases over in your hands, reading liner notes like they were sacred text. You waited by the radio with your finger on the record button, hoping your favorite song would play before the DJ talked over the intro. And when MTV started showing music videos, real, actual music videos, watching Ozzy or Maiden or Dio on a television screen felt like witnessing something almost mythological. This wasn't background noise, this was an event. But here, where the story changes. When you finally got to a live show, whether it was a theater, an arena, or a sweaty club with bad lighting and sticky floors, something shifted in you permanently. Because surrounded by thousands of other people who felt exactly what you felt, who knew every lyric, who threw their fists in the air at the same moment, you understood for the first time what it meant to belong somewhere completely. That's not a small thing, that's not something you just forget. But that's only part of the story. Because if heavy metal had just been catchy songs, most people would have moved on the way they moved on from everything else. You don't still have strong feelings about a TV show you watched twice in 1987. So why is this different? And this is the part most people completely miss. The appeal of metal for Gen X men was never really about shock value. It wasn't about being angry or dangerous or trying to scare people. For most of the men who grew up with this music, the core of it was something much quieter. If you ever felt like you didn't quite fit in, if you were the quiet kid, or the kid from a blue-collar family, or the kid who wasn't athletic enough or social enough or whatever the world seemed to want from you, metal gave you a place where you didn't have to pretend to be anyone else. You didn't have to perform, you didn't have to shrink. The music was honest in a way that felt almost radical. It talked about darkness without flinching. It talked about struggle and power and facing hard things and not backing down. And at 14 or 16, in a world that didn't always explain itself to you, that honesty hit differently than anything else on the radio. It didn't just entertain you, it reflected you. The strange thing is, none of this is really about heavy metal. It's about what the music represented, a space that accepted you without conditions, and the people standing next to you at shows, wearing the same patches, knowing the same obscure B-sides, they got it. You didn't need to explain yourself. That kind of belonging, built on authenticity rather than performance, is genuinely rare. And it stays with you. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand you. There's a version of this story where a middle-aged man still listening to thrash metal is clinging to the past, still trying to be 17, still refusing to grow up. You've probably felt that implication before, even if nobody said it out loud. But that framing misses something fundamental about the way many Gen X men think. You grew up largely independent, latchkey kids, a lot of you home alone before it was a movie concept, navigating afternoons without adult supervision, figuring things out by doing them. You weren't raised on constant reassurance. You were raised to handle things, to be self-reliant, to trust your own judgment. And that instinct doesn't disappear when the subject is music. Hear what that actually means. If something was genuinely meaningful to you at 17, if it was real, not just trendy, you probably didn't see a compelling reason to abandon it at 50 just because the culture moved on. Gen X has always had a skepticism of trends, a resistance to being told what's cool, what's appropriate, what you're supposed to outgrow. There's something psychologically coherent about a man who says, "I know what I love, I know why I love it, and I don't need anyone's permission to keep loving it." That's not arrested development, that's integrity. Now there's another layer to this that goes even deeper. Maybe you still remember the first metal album you ever bought. Maybe you remember exactly where you were when you heard it, the room, the light, what it felt like when that opening riff hit for the first time. And if you do, I'd bet you can still picture it right now. That's not an accident. Scientists have actually studied this. The music you hear during your teenage years gets tied to some of your strongest memories. That's why one guitar riff can instantly take you back to an old car, an old friend, or a version of yourself you thought was gone. The song didn't just play in the background of those moments, it got encoded alongside them. The emotion, the place, the feeling of who you were. Because what you remember isn't actually the song. It's the version of yourself that was there when you first heard it. When you hear those songs today, you're not just listening to music. You're making contact with someone you used to be, a younger version who was figuring everything out, who felt things intensely, who hadn't yet learned to keep the volume down. And maybe there's something worth honoring in that, not because the past was perfect, not because you'd want to go back, but because that younger version of you had something real, something unfiltered and certain, and the music is one of the few things that still connects you directly to him. That's not nostalgia, that's continuity. Now it's worth being honest about something. Not every Gen X man became a metalhead, and not every Gen X man who loved this music in his 20s kept it as his primary identity into his 50s. Plenty of people moved toward other genres, other hobbies, other things that gave them the same sense of meaning and belonging that metal gave others. None of this is about suggesting one path was better than another. The point isn't that metal is better. The point is that for the men who kept it close, it meant something deeply personal, something that earned its place through years of real experience, real memory, real identity. And that kind of meaning doesn't just evaporate because you're older now. So why did Gen X men never stop being metalheads? The deeper reason has very little to do with music. It has to do with the fact that this music arrived at exactly the right moment, when you were still becoming who you were, when you were most open to being shaped by something, when belonging and identity weren't abstract concepts but urgent, daily needs. Metal didn't ask you to pretend. It didn't ask you to be softer, or more acceptable, or easier for other people to understand. It met you exactly where you were. And for a generation of men who were often told to walk it off, toughen up, and figure it out alone, being fully met by something without conditions was not a small thing. Maybe the reason you never stopped being a metalhead isn't about the music at all. Maybe it's because the music represents a part of yourself you were never willing to give up, a part that was honest when everything else wanted you to perform, a part that was loud when everything else told you to be quiet, a part that knew who it was and held on. And if that's true, then the question was never really why you kept listening. The question is why anyone would ever stop. I'm curious, what was the first metal album or band that really felt like yours? Was it Metallica, Maiden, Sabbath, Pantera, something more underground that nobody else in your school knew about? Let everyone know in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear the stories. And if videos like this remind you of a part of yourself you never wanted to lose, consider subscribing. There are a lot more conversations like this one ahead.